element that's really missing when we move to remote. You don't get those incidental hangouts.
Building a remote culture needs to be intentional and consistent.
And this is kind of a hack if I were to redesign it in a remote company. I would think of 3 key buckets, and that's the first is
Firing is tough and it always feels wrong, but it's the best thing for the company.
culture is oxygen. And I'm saying this because we often say cash is blood.
If you just give up and you don't put the time or the energy or the investment into it, a remote culture will not sustain and you will lose your people. We are back with another episode of the Do As I Say, Not As I Did podcast. And as always, the name explains everything. We're going to teach you what to do based on the mistakes we already made. Each week I bring on different founders and investors or product experts or people and culture experts, just anyone who's very smart and can help us learn how to build a great business. And then together, we answer the questions you sent through about what's going on in your lives and in your businesses. So if you do have questions or you're trying to put out fires, send us an email and we'll workshop it on the podcast. So send those emails through to podcast@joelditrapani.com. I know that's a mouthful, so I'm just going to put that in the show notes so you can copy and paste it later. I'm your host, Joel Ditrapani, and apart from having a long name, I am the co-founder and co-CEO of Vygo, which is an edtech scale-up we've grown through Australia and the UK, and we're now focused on the US. On top of that, I'm also an advisor and a coach in the product space where I help startups and businesses learn how to build great product teams, because that's how you build great products, and I absolutely got that wrong the first time in a big way. So I'm hoping to teach you from my mistakes there. And today, I'm joined by my great friend, Ash Allison. Right now, Ash is the operations manager at Doing Good Rewards. But before this, we worked together for years at my startup Vygo, where Ash was the head of people and culture. We've spent hours and days debating every element of building culture and building teams, and Ash is incredibly gifted at this. Prior even to that, Ash was a consultant at Bain and a lawyer at another company where she actually helped an inmate get off death row, which sounds made up, but is actually completely true. And then during 2022, Ash ran an award-winning book club and is even currently writing her own book. And on top of everything, Ash is one of the kindest and most loving people I know, and is so much fun to hang around. And I'm so excited to introduce her to you all. Ash is an expert at building company culture. So let's jump into it. Welcome, Ash. Thank you so much for coming on today.
Hey Joel, thanks for that intro. I particularly loved the book club. That is probably my pride and joy of everything I've done. But it's lovely to be here, and it's great just to chat to you.
Well, before we jump into the questions today, tell us, you've got a lot of stuff going on right now. Where are you spending your time?
Yes, I'm spending my time mostly across an operations manager of a social enterprise, but it is a tech scale up as well. So it's super exciting. The idea is to maximize impact and profit that goes to charity. So we really do focus on donations. That's awesome. And then the other half of my time is actually split between I'm training to be a civil celebrant to conduct marriages, and I am trying to publish a book. So I've written a fiction book. I'm just going through the drafting process now, and the next step is to hopefully publish a piece.
I love it. Follow Ash, and we'll show you her book later down the track. Well, let's jump into the questions. The first question today is called, how do you build a company culture remotely? Like many of us, our team is now 100% remote. Most of us love it, but I've noticed that our company culture has gone down. We used to be a close team, have good banter, go for beers, or have a foosball tournament. At the moment, none of that is around. What do you do to build and maintain your company culture while working remotely? Have you done some remote team building activities? Any ideas and suggestions would be appreciated. From Martin's Millers.
Great alliteration. I love the alliterated name, Martin Millers. It's a good question, isn't it, Joe? And probably something we've spent way too long talking about, remote culture in particular. I think COVID coming in as well created that conversation and made it really mainstream, where every company, not just remote companies, but every company had to really think about how to facilitate culture remotely. So it's a great question, and I can't say, I don't know if anyone's nailed it yet, and I think that's why we've also seen a big transition of a lot of companies going back to a hybrid model or in person, and we've seen that happening at the moment. I think it was recently Zoom. Was it Zoom that said employees have to come back, and they're like the main tech that everyone's using? Yeah, so I think it's a great question. and something I spend a lot of time thinking about. I do you have any thoughts, like, straight off the bat?
I got a bunch of thoughts, but I want to see where your mind goes to start with.
Yeah, I think probably, I guess there's elements to a company culture when we think about it, and there's kind of those more the mission, vision, values part, like you follow the framework, you set it out, you have set meetings that happen once a week for social interactions. And I think all of that's really attainable remotely. And I don't think that's really hard. I think you can set a vision. I think you can celebrate values if you're doing it through Slack or through emails or even just award ceremonies. I think you can get founders talking through mission and vision regularly. And I think you can easily have a Zoom meeting. But I think the element that's really missing when we move to remote, and this is why people often ask, how do you maintain that culture? It's so different from going for beers with friends, is because you don't get those incidental hangouts. And it's those moments, I often think, where it's not just your team, but it's, you're sitting next to your colleague and you start giggling about something that's not related to the pieces you're working on, or you pass someone in the hall and get into a chat and they're not even in your team. And that's kind of like the big companies like Pixar, who have those spaces and lunchrooms, or Google, who has like slides and play activities for their employees. They're like creating spaces where that intentionally is set up to happen. And that's often what you miss in that remote culture. So I think it's a lot about trying to think of ways where you can have those incidental moments between teams and cross collaboratively.
Yeah, I don't think I don't think there is a simple solution, but I do think that I don't know if everyone thinks about it the right way. I think a remote culture is just going to be different to an in-person culture, and that's totally fine. I don't think you should always try and, recreate exactly what it was like. Remote is different, and it has so many, benefits and disadvantages at the same time, but you should lean into building a remote culture. And I know for a long time when we first went remote, we just kept trying to make it what it was. And that's not an effective way to do things. And, over years of Ash and I crafting that together, we shifted it to being a remote first culture. And that meant the expectations needed to change with that. And remote cultures can still be fun, and they can still be like super effective and mission driven and values driven. But they're not in person. You're not going to have foosball tournaments like just randomly, and you're not going to have incidental conversations as much. But you need to know that the culture will be different, and you need to work out if that's the right for you. And for us, it's right. I love our remote culture. Like, remote cultures are awesome, but they're different for different set of reasons. The next thing I would kind of say is that building a remote culture needs to be intentional and consistent. In an office, you kind of can get away with culture just happening to some extent. The best cultures won't just happen, but you can get away with having an okay culture. If you just give up and you don't put the time or the energy or the investment into it, a remote culture will not sustain, and you will lose your people. Also, I guess, the next thing that kind of comes to mind is that not everyone is meant to work in a remote company. So you need to hire specifically for remote. And that means as you transition to remote, and if you plan on staying remote, you're probably going to cycle through and lose some people, because people aren't going to be happy in that culture. And that's okay. Changes happen as values change, as the company changes, as size changes, as remote or in-person changes. People will change with that too, because people need to be where they like. So they're my kind of high-level thoughts. I would say I think about building a remote culture in a very intentional process, though. I think there are kind of like 4 key pillars that I'm constantly thinking about that Ash, we would go through. I guess we never really talked about this at the time, but a remote culture for me boils down to these 4 things. One is clear expectations. Clear expectations are even more important in a remote world. Someone needs to know what is expected of them. Like, what am I meant to do in my job? What does it mean for me to be successful or not? What is expected of my team? What is expected of the company? What can I expect of my manager? Really clear written expectations are very important. They need to be updated and reviewed and talked about all the time. The second is communication overkill. You need to be saying the same clear messages so many times you want to vomit. Like, if you say it one more time, it makes you feel sick. So the thing about, remote is that you get less time together. So you need to make that time matter more. And you just need every moment you get, you need to say it. Here's our values. Here's our values. Here's our mission. Here's our mission. You need to constantly reiterate over and over and over again the same messages so people can rally behind that. You need to have messages that are clear, understandable, and repeated. The next thing I think is social availability. So I've just coined this term more recently. I love saying it, social availability. What I think, Ash, we went through phases where we had a lot of events the team could go to, and then like less events the team could go to, and then more events. And what happens is that when you start putting on a lot of events for the team, people start coming to them. And then less people come, and eventually less and less until like almost no one comes to those events. That actually doesn't matter. It's still important to have those events because people need to know that there is availability and there is time and opportunity to engage with their peers and with their bosses and in a more social setting. So you need to constantly have different social settings for people to have the ability to have fun at. It doesn't matter if they're engaged with or not. But if you take them away, you're actively saying we don't care about the social side of the business, and people will get upset. So I'd say you just need to have time and time again for people to have the chance to engage. And the last is structured relationships. Like, because there aren't those incidental relationships where, by the water cooler, the proverbial water cooler, I think you need to, in a sense, structure and force those relationships. So obviously you need to have one-on-ones, but the things that we also did on top of that was diagonals. So that's just another person for regularly monthly for someone in your team to catch up with. But we also have like coffee catch-ups. So every single month, someone in our team gets matched with someone else in our team, a new person every single month or every single fortnight where they get to have a coffee and just, have time on the calendar, have a new interaction, have a new way of thinking. So there's so much that we could break down inside those. But for me, I just think they're kind of like the key pillars. I guess what you said as well, Ash, like vision and mission and values are so important though. Like that sits above all of this. If you don't have that, like your company is screwed.
Yeah, no, I totally agree. And I think such a big part, what you touched on at the start, is setting that expectation really clearly that this is different and we can't expect it to be the same. It's not going for beers with friends. If I was to get, and I do also agree just what you said at the end, like we're talking about mission, vision, value, and I think you and I would often think of company culture as this holistic thing, like, everything that is the company's essence. And probably when a lot of other people think about company culture or an employee, they're thinking only about an element of that, like the fun element or the social element. It's like, when do I actually hang out with my employees, not how we motivated to do things. And if I was to think of probably how we designed it at Vygo, maybe subconsciously, but and this is kind of a hack, if I were to redesign it in a remote company, I would think of 3 key buckets that you'd be thinking about creating that social framework. And that's, the first is the second is the company to the individual. So it's what can we do from the company to the individual to celebrate them. And the third is the individual. And so if I just give an example in each, if we think about the company, those are the spaces, the proverbial water cooler, or when do we get to interact? And that's things like you mentioned, the diagonals, the coffee catch-ups. We even tried virtual reality at one point and did events through VR. So like mini golf.
That was a fun test.
Yeah. So like creating those spaces, it might be trivia that you're doing. It might be any kind of social activities. They're usually virtual. It's very different from in person. But that's one element. And that's the one that's easiest to nail in person. And so that's why the other 2 buckets become so important for remote. So when we think about the company to individual, it's when does the individual feel like the company's celebrating them? And we did at Vygo, we did anniversaries and birthdays, and we'd send things out intentionally and create messages. We'd celebrate times where individuals were doing really good things. I think there are times where we'd encourage managers just to spend on employees and say, thanks for doing this. Send them a hot chocolate, send them a coffee in the morning, surprise and delight them. And I think that also happens somewhat in an in-person company, but probably to a lesser degree. The last one, and this is, I think, particularly unique when you have either an extremely hybrid company or remote, is the individual. And that's really around when we can flash what the expectations are and why this is different. It's how do you celebrate that personal time and the flexibility you get as an individual by being at a remote company. And so, for example, we trialed and it became quite successful and mainstream, Joel, Flexible Friday. And that was a very special thing. You can't really do this at an in-person company, but on Fridays, people were encouraged to use the day however suited them. And if that meant doing all their deep work, do that. But if that meant going for a long picnic with their family or for a boozy lunch, go off and do that as well. And so think about like, how do we really celebrate flexibility? Saying you can work whenever you want, you can work from wherever you want, you can travel. So I think those would be the three buckets and hacks, I would say. If you need to set up your social culture and make it really fun, just think about making sure you target all of those.
Yeah, I totally agree with that. There's actually just so much I'd love to jump into this question. Like, there's just so many things that we've done that worked at Vygo and didn't work at Vygo, that I'd love to share. But I feel like we would spend the entire time we have together on that. But Ash has come up with so many amazing things for the company. If you have questions on it, just I'll leave her socials in here as well and hit her up, because she has so many great ideas. Like, we have like Vygo houses, we have like these coffee programs for people, we have these expectations document. Like, Ash implemented so many amazing things, but I do think they sit in those major buckets. So if we kind of bring this one to a close and we give a final judgment to Martins Millers here, stage one is you need to realize that remote is different, and that's totally okay. There's more flexibility, there's less incidental interactions, but remote is different, and if you're going to do that, be intentional about it. The second thing is that you need to be very consistent about it. You need to be investing in their time and energy and making it clear that culture is important to you. The third is that you need to break it down to giving people support in the way they need it, in the way that Ash said. Think about those buckets. What is the company doing? What's the company doing with the individual? And lastly is like, how are you celebrating the individual and the way they work as well? And the way I think about those things as well is that clear expectations, communication overkill, and social availability and structured relationships are the 4 key pillars there in my mind. But that's all for Martins Millers. We'll close that one out. And Martins Millers, you have been advised. Do you like our tagline?
Done. Yeah. And case solved.
Case solved. All right. Next question. Here's another one that Ash and I have spent a lot of time talking about. The question is called, should I fire my first developer? In the beginning of the year, I took the leap and hired my first full-time developer. My plan was to find someone who could take over the responsibility for a significant portion of my software project. Running my little startup has become very time-consuming, and nowadays I only have limited time to do any development myself. Also, the scale of this project has become quite large, and it's getting quite difficult for me as a single person to work on everything all at once. Now, fast forwarding to today, almost half a year later, this guy is still working with me and has helped in many different areas of the project. He's done some good work on minor aspects, but really just underperforming across the board. Overall, I find that he's very slow. Also, he asks for my help on every task, and he frequently gets completely stuck, and then I have to fix his code. He's distracted me quite a lot from doing my own work, and when I didn't help him, he's unable to finish his. Also, for all code that he writes, I often need to make many corrections and then ask him to redo it. His probation period is coming to an end, and I'm thinking of firing him before it ends. Perhaps I'm overreacting. I don't think he's all that terrible. I've seen many developers worse than him in the industry. I believe that I'm a very fast programmer myself, and thus I have very high standards. Perhaps I'm a little more productive with his help, but not enough to justify paying him a full-time salary. I need a developer who can work independently and who I can rely on. Otherwise, this won't help much to reduce my own workload. What are your thoughts? From Cone83.
Cone83. Wow. That is such a relatable conundrum. It's almost like we could just change our names or departments and easily put ourselves in Cone83's seat. And it's a painful one. I think it's probably, and Joel, anyone in the people and culture space or who's worked even as a founder or in a company is often quite people oriented or team oriented. Like, they want to build a team, they enjoy interactions, and that's probably the hardest part when it starts to get this question of firing. And I think it's probably the part I struggle with the most, but have some strong opinions having gone through these processes and having learned. And I know you've dealt with, probably more in the product space, very similar issues, and we've talked through a lot of these. So maybe I'll let you kick it off on this one, knowing what you've been through, and then pitch in with some of my thoughts.
Yeah, look, firing is tough, and it always feels wrong. I've had to let go of a lot of people at this point, and it still makes me sick to my stomach. It's one of the worst experiences, but it's the best thing for the company. At the end of the day, if you kept holding on to people that weren't right for the company and right for your team would tank. The whole company would tank, and you'd have nothing left, and you'd have to fire them anyway. So I guess, from the read of this, it seems like my first read is get rid of him. Cone 83, get rid of him. But that being said, I think there's a pretty big chance that you've done a poor job of managing this guy as well. So I guess I think about hiring, management, and firing all pretty interconnected. They always say, hire slow and fire fast. And I haven't always followed that advice. I've kept people for far too long. But I think about, when you get someone, it is your job as a manager to enable them in the best possible way to succeed and to excel and to push your company forward. Because the whole idea is that you're hiring this person and making this big investment is that they can drive the company forward. So you want to invest all the time and energy you need to get them up and running and delivering. And the way that happens is by giving them clear expectations. If they know, written down, I'm meant to do these 10 things to this level, and you're constantly coming back to it, it's really clear when someone's underperforming or not. And I think that's the biggest question here, is that you're not really, it seems pretty clear from the email that they're underperforming, but I think a lot of people don't really know, can I expect more? Can I not expect more? I'm not too sure. And you're saying Cone 83, maybe I've seen people worse than them. Doesn't matter if you've seen people worse. What is the expectation in your company? What are the things that you agree to on a monthly basis, on a weekly basis, that you expect from this person? When I worked with Ash, we had a document. It said, here's the 10 things I expect of Ash. And every single week we'd come back together and we'd look at them. So not every week, that's way too much. Every month we'd say, how are you going, Ash? How are you feeling about this? Do you think you're meeting these expectations, exceeding them, or falling below those expectations? And Ash was always exceeding. But I've had people that were consistently falling below those expectations. And that's kind of okay, When someone's constantly, underperforming in a job, they're having a bad time and you're having a bad time. So it is best to cut those ties. So I'll just always say, when you're managing someone, your number one job should be to give them a very clear understanding of what success looks like in that role and how they can achieve that success. And if they're not, you need to be really clear and give them a lot of feedback. You're not doing this. You're not doing that. And if things don't change, we're going to let you go. It should never be a surprise. And if they continue to underperform and they don't hit those expectations, you need to let them go. But it shouldn't be a surprise. Making it a surprise is really bad. So if I was in your exact position, Cone 83, I would sit down with them. I would create a scorecard or an expectations document saying, from now on, here's what I expect from you. Your code needs to be perfect. You need to get this many tickets done a week or this many story points done a week. And then, because they're underperforming now, meet with them every single week. See if there's improvement. If there's improvement, amazing. You have the person, the company's moving forward. But if not, they need to know that they're going to get let go of, and then just let go of them. And try and do it before the probation period, because after probation period is tough. So, if you have these expectations and they're hitting them, amazing. The company's moving forward. But if they're not, and they're consistently not hitting those new expectations, it's very clear they need to know that they're going to let go of them. And then you do just let go. You part ways. They go find a job that they're better suited to, and then you can find someone who can really help push your company forward. And if they're underperforming, they're probably having a bad time. So that's totally fine. They're probably going to be a whole lot happier after that anyway. But it will be hard, and having those hard conversations will be tough. That's the way I kind of think about letting go of someone. It needs to start from a position of very clear expectations.
And Joel, I love kind of how you think about that, and I definitely think about it similarly. It's a process, and it starts with hiring. The middle part that we often don't talk about is managing, and the final part is firing or promoting. I mean, ideally, there's kind of two avenues that come out of that management. You either have to let them go, or you're advancing them because they're exceeding expectations or accelerating, hopefully. I think the mechanism to do this well is expectations, and that goes throughout the whole process. So you start at that hiring stage, and when you're hiring someone, already having those expectations clear, maybe having a scorecard or a JD that really outlines those expectations, going through that with them in the interview, testing them on that, getting their commitment. It might be through a homework task, but having that upfront at the hiring process, so you're already telling them straight up, here's what I want from you, here's what I expect for you to move forward, and then iterating on those expectations as you might promote them or as the company grows. I think that second part is crucial. It's the management. Are you managing them well? If you've got a coder who's constantly coming to you for approval of the code or making mistakes, are you training them? Are you sitting with them and watching them do their code and saying, hey, hang on a second, do you think you could have done that different? Or next time I want you to iterate and I want you to share it with me and show me how it works. Or I want you to review my code and say if it's wrong. So are you really taking the time to train them early on in the piece to hit those expectations? And then getting to that final part, which is the firing or the promoting. And I think at that point, it's really clear whether you make one of those two decisions. If they're not hitting those expectations that you've set and constantly train them on, then it is that firing route. If they are, and they're hopefully exceeding, it's going to that promotion route and resetting the expectations again. And really, promotion is just hiring again. It's saying, I want you to do this role. Here are my expectations. Now, I think without that mechanism of expectations, the real issue is our bias. We hire someone because we think they can do a job. And if they're not hitting that job, they're not doing it, constantly start questioning yourself. Hang on, did I make a mistake? Did I think they could do more? Could no one else do this role? Are there worse people in the industry? And we start second guessing ourselves because we've already said, I expect them to do what I think they'll do, but we haven't clearly really set it out for ourselves and we're not measuring it. So we're trying to make what's a really subjective process that's prone to personal bias as objective as we can by having this clear agreement, like a social agreement between us to say, if you're not hitting this, I'm going to fire you. If you are, I'm going to promote you. And that's kind of the way you remove that personal element or that guilt, that extreme empathy or that bias, like I've made a mistake, from the whole equation. So I think when you do get to a point, if you haven't set it up like this, if you haven't used the expectations mechanism we've spoken about, and you get to a point and you're like, it's a year in, it's 6 months in, probation's wrapping up, and they're not performing how I'd want them to, you really do have to start thinking, that's a gut reaction. Something's telling me something's wrong. I should set out those expectations, lay them out. Are they doing that? Question, is it a matter of I can train them to do that or not? And then you probably do have to let them go, but it's going to be a harder decision than if you set yourself up for success at the start.
Yeah, absolutely. It is, it is interesting when you don't have these expectations documents, you just have this kind of vague idea in your head of what you want this person to do. Then they also kind of have a different vague idea in their head of what they think you want them to do. So if you just get it down on paper, it just takes so much ambiguity out of it. This person that's working for Coordinator 3 might think that they want their code reviewed every single time. Like that making mistakes is fine. They're just there to get a bunch of stuff out. So it really just does help. And, from the sounds of it, you've got a lot of clarity here. Like it's probably the wrong thing, but I would still go through this process to really make sure that you have that confidence in that decision too. All right.
Hopefully that helps you, Cone 83, but tough decision ahead.
Yeah, tough decision, Cone 83. Look, let's give Cone the final judgment here. So if you're in a position where you're not sure if you should let go of someone, step 1, create an expectations document that you share with this person. Create it together. What do I expect of this person? What do they expect of me? Then meet regularly to understand if they're hitting those expectations or not. And then you can make the decision. If they're continually underperforming against those expectations, it's a clear-cut decision. Get rid of this person, and they know what's coming because they already know what they're meant to do in their role. And that's everything. All right. Well,
case closed.
Case closed. You've been advised. That's it. You've been advised, Cone 83. Okay. Now we've got time for one more question, and I'll save this for the end because I'm actually so interested in your opinion on this one, Ash. This question is called, what do you think a company culture really means in one phrase? I'm currently working on my first MVP. I've experienced hiring freelancers in the past, so I was searching for candidates. While doing so, I began to think, what will I do if I ever have to hire permanent employees? Then I began to wonder, what does company culture actually mean? I have a hard time grasping the concept of a company culture. I've worked for various companies from different industries, yet I've never really felt like I deeply understood or even cared about how the organization's settings have impacted me. Einstein once said, if you can't explain it simply, you don't understand it well enough. So what's your simple definition of culture? Do you consider it important to implement before hiring, or is it something that just naturally arises when a group of people gather? And this is by Easy and Fast. Ease and Fast.
Ease and Fast, putting us on the spot. One line to kind of summarize our careers or our areas. This is actually the first time I've been asked this, so this is a real immediate reaction, and I might jump back on this, but I'm going to say culture is oxygen. And I'm saying this because we often say cash is blood. When we think about a company, we say cash is blood. That's what keeps the company, the heart beating. And I'm saying culture is oxygen. You need both for a company to survive. And it's the breath. It's what's coming in and going out, like what's keeping the blood pumping through the company and keeping that organism functioning at its proper rate. You don't want a respiratory infection when you're running a company. you don't want to be in the hospital. You don't want COVID. I'm going to say culture is oxygen. That's my one-liner. I'll think on that. Joel, do you have a one-liner?
I don't know. Reading this question when I put it in actually made me anxious because I was like, I don't even have a good answer to it. But I thought I'd put it in anyway. So I would say company culture is the oxygen of a company. No, kidding.
That is so unique.
No. I would say company culture is kind of like the glue that holds everyone together. So I think founders, me being guilty, can be very energizing and erratic and kind of crazy. And they bring all that energy and that forces the company forward and sets that vision. But I think you need a culture that holds everyone really strongly and firmly together as you move forward. And it's not just one thing that holds everything together, because it's the company needs to constantly move forward and achieve these goals and grow and change. And when everyone is like really invested in the company and they understand they understand how they can add value and how they feel valued and everything, like I think they get held together. So like that vision and mission knows where we're going, but the culture is what pulls everyone into line. And when someone starts to fray out on a different direction and a developer starts building in the wrong way, the culture is what, can bring them back or if like it helps keep focus because they know who they are and where they take place in the team.
Yeah, and I think, Joel, if you think about your analogy to glue and mine taking oxygen, both are quite vague and high level kind of conceptual ideas. And I think that probably goes to show our understanding of company culture, which is not really like something you can just summarize in a line, or it's not really something small. Like you can take elements of a culture, like what's a mission? Oh, it's a one-line statement about where we're going, or a vision. It's a one-line statement about where we're going to be in 5 years' time. Like I think those things are easy to summarize in a line. What does this mean? But when we're thinking about culture, it's really that umbrella term that has so many different parts and frameworks and is a more kind of comprehensive thing that surrounds a company, sticks it together, allows it to kind of operate. But it's very hard to say culture is just one easy little thing to nail. Like if you get this line, you've got it and you understand it. It is kind of, there's so many elements to it, and you can be nailing one part. Like you could have a really great social team, but no work's getting produced. No one's doing anything. Or you might have people that are really values driven and just hate each other. Like there's so many things that you're constantly working on and changing. And I think that's why it's probably really hard to say in one line definitively what is it. It is more this kind of concept or overarching umbrella that encompasses a lot of things like glue or like oxygen. We've had to go kind of that metaphorical route over something that's tangible, which might be a bit hard for Fast and Easy because it seems like he wants that fast and easy approach.
Yeah, it is a very good question. I'm actually just going to spend time also post-podcast pondering on this because it is so important and like especially in a remote world to have a culture like it's I say this on every podcast, like it is expectations. That is everything. Expectations of everything, like socially, what can we expect of one another? Professionally, what do we expect? In our role, what do we expect? In a team, what do we expect? And making it all really clear. But I think you're so right, Ash, that it is a lot of building blocks that actually make up culture. And as you said earlier, like a lot of people think culture is having beers and foosball and fun. But culture is not just that. Culture is every element of the company that I guess like outside of the day-to-day work. But it even kind of makes that up. Performance management is part of culture. Hiring is part of culture. OKRs and leadership and vision is part of culture. It's the in-between.
Yeah, no, I absolutely agree with you. I think it is such an integral part of a business and it runs parallel. It's almost like asking, what is business? And saying it in one line. And it's really hard to kind of summarize something that's so all-encompassing into one line. I'm sure if we spent heaps of time, we could find some MECE buckets, the mutually exclusive and comprehensively exhaustive buckets that summarize it. But I think that would even be so much more vague than just saying glue. I think that would be a harder concept to understand. So I think for any founder thinking about what is company culture, it's probably pretty important not to think about it as just one little thing, but as something that runs parallel to the business or complements the business and is an integral part of the business that feeds into every facet of the business. Every time you're thinking of something about the business, you've also got to think about culture. If you're thinking about raising, you're still thinking about how do we approach raising? And that approach is usually something to do with your culture. It's like, do you put your investors or your shareholders first?
I've got a pitch for you, Ash.
Yes.
How about company culture is the lens through which you do everything. It's the approach through which you take every action. So company culture is about how do you raise? How do you perform? Performance management. It's the way you make those decisions. It's the way you look at everything. The company culture is what shapes it.
So business is what you do and culture is how you do it.
Yes, that is it.
Quickly, tell fast and easy. You've been advised.
All right. Final judgment. Give it to ease and fast.
Ease and fast. Sorry, fast and
That's
easy.
all right. That's okay.
It's just a nickname I use for ease and fast. I think we agreed that it's business is what you do and culture is how you do it.
Yeah. Company culture is the approach or the lens in which you do everything. So business is what you do and company culture is how you go about it.
Love it. You've been advised.
You've been advised, ease and fast. Or fast and easy, that's what his close friends call him.
That's the cultural element of ease and fast.
I love it. Well, look, that's all the questions we have time for. So we'll end with plugs. The fan favorite part of the show, plugs. So, tell us, Ash, what's going on? What do you want to plug? Where can people follow you? What books are you reading? Anything? What plugs do you want to throw out into the world?
I want to throw out, follow me on LinkedIn if you want, Ashley Allison. No, you can follow me on Instagram as well. I might not accept your request. It's a very social page, but I will soon be a celebrant. So look up celebrant Ashley Allison. And if you're getting married in the near future, let me know. I'll be qualified. Not yet. I'm still in the process of registering, but I will be qualified to do weddings in 2024. And I will keep you updated on how my book goes because I would love to share that with everyone.
And if Ash does your wedding, there'll be a great people and culture feeling at your wedding.
Yeah, it would just be a vibe. The vibe.
It'll be an absolute vibe. All right. Well, on my side, like and subscribe, guys. Get your phones out, like and subscribe, 5 stars, every podcast platform you have. Then, as always, get out your friend's phone, your family's phone, your dog's phone, like and subscribe on those as well. Download every episode, take up all the storage. The more storage you take up, the better. And then thank you to everyone who writes in. We absolutely love these problems and questions. They're so much fun to talk about. Give us these philosophical ones. They're actually really hard. We love them though. So if you've got questions you want to send them through to podcast@joelditrapani.com. And lastly, I love having these conversations. So, you want to have a conversation, you got problems or challenges in your own business. I love talking about it. Book some time with me. I've got a booking link in the show notes as well. So I'd love to have a call as well. And that's everything. We're going to wrap this one up. Ashley Allison, thank you so much for arguing with me and laughing with me today. I loved this conversation. I'm very keen to have you on again. And to everyone else, this has been another episode of the Do As I Say podcast. We will see you next week.